to kick off and welcome you all to Tea and Buns. Tea and Buns is a community of practice, which means, yes, we chat and we get to know each other and we come together hopefully once a month. I haven't done a Tea and Buns for a couple of months. It's been extremely busy, as I know you've all been busy last couple of months, but this was an amazing opportunity to come together to talk about a topic which clearly a lot of us are very interested about. And so today, Tea and Buns, which is a quote from The Wind in the Willows, that beautiful, iconic English book called Wind in the Willows, that says, come inside, let's have tea and buns and make the world a better place. So really this community of practice is all about encouraging and supporting each other to make the world a better place. And today we're going to see if the concept of trust can help us to do that. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all living and working on. And of course, Brisbane and QT is based in Turrbal and Yagara lands. So welcome to anyone here today from different lands. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So absolutely wonderful to have you all here today, especially if you're new. It's fantastic to have you. I'm going to actually share my screen and we're going to kick off this conversation. So let me just, there you go. You should be able to see my screen. I can see all your faces. So lovely to see all your faces. But we are recording today, just so you know, because some people love to watch the recordings. And by the way, if you haven't checked out our previous recordings of other Tea and Buns, please do go and check them all out. There's a wonderful resource there for you. It is a community of practice, which means we want as much questions and discussion from you. You can either come off mute, but only while you're talking, please, because there's a lot of us. So we want to try and limit the interference in kind of sound. But if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand or just put it in the chat. We're very happy for you to chat and ask questions as well and keep talking in the chat. That's another great way of doing that. I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat. And there's a couple of us here that are going to try and make sure that we don't miss any questions. But of course, you can just raise your hand or just come off mute if you want to ask Vanessa or myself a question. So welcome, everybody. We've got a few minutes together. And we really want to kick this off today with a bit of a question in the chat. I've been looking at this concept of trust for a few months now because I'm part of CFE, which is the Centre for Future Enterprise, that has a trust alliance. And we've been building this trust alliance for the last year or so to really look at the concept of trust. And I've been asking myself, how do you know if someone is trustworthy? So I thought I'd just ask you, how do you know someone's trustworthy? Please pop it in the chat and see what you think, because we kind of rely on this people being trustworthy, but I'm really keen to know, how do you know someone is trustworthy? So Ash says alignment in values. Yeah, follow through on promises. I'm teaching my kids that at the moment. Don't promise anything you can't follow through on. Do what they say they're going to do, deliver on their promises. Yep. Vouched for. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so someone sort of gives you that reputation, or can say they are trustworthy. Okay, that's good. Morals, values, yes. Words, credibility, and actions, reliability. Yes, it's so much more than just words, isn't it? Because we can say we're going to do something, but it's the action at the end of the day that can sometimes really make people trustworthy or not. Yeah, so Sam says, see them in action, walking the talk. Yeah, that's great. And Jamie, empathy. Yeah, interesting. Michelle says, I like Rachel's Botsman's definition of trust. Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown. Ooh, interesting. Well, look, this is all really great, and it's really interesting to see what you think being trustworthy means, and how you gain trust, and how perhaps we can discuss how you lose trust as well. But I really wanted to just introduce you, Vanessa, because Vanessa has come along today, and she's an expert in trust. She's been researching and working with organisations and people around the concept of trust for a number number of years. And when I met Vanessa a few months ago, I was intrigued with her work and the fact that she'd actually written a book about trust and had really looked into this. If you want to check Vanessa out, she has an organisation called Entente. Vanessa, welcome. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this concept of, or understanding why do we need to know about trust? What's so important about it? Why is trustworthiness important?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth, for having me here. And hi, everyone. Great to be here today. Look, it's such a big topic, isn't it? And something that we kind of all talk about. We all kind of think we know what trust is until we really start to dig into it. And for me, it was just this wealth of, I just love digging into it. And I've been now doing this for over 15 years and it just continues. I love exploring and trying to understand trust and what it is and how it works and things. So that really the start point for me, quick bit of background, I had a career in compliance and risk management in the finance industry. So I always tell people I sort of worked in one of the least trusted industries, probably at the mistrust end of the business. So I was dealing with a lot of the breakdown of trust. And what I found interesting was that organisations could be quite compliant. They could tick the boxes, really, be quite clever in the way that they could tick the boxes and be compliant, but they were still breaking trust, right? We still had unhappy customers. We still had, issues with employees. And I thought there's something else going on here I saw that trust was still breaking down. So I had an interest in what was really going on. There was something deeper going on there. And then my son actually kind of really brought it home for me. So I was a single parent. My husband actually passed away quite suddenly when my son was only a baby, and so I've been raising my son on my own and had this beautiful relationship with my son. And he gave me a card for Mother's Day that he'd made at school, and it brings home the point that some of you sort of raised there earlier about trustworthiness, which kind of hurt a bit, I have to say. But it made me this lovely card, and it said, my mum is loving and caring. She likes to buy lots of clothes. She always writes and reads. Sometimes she keeps promises. But the best thing about my mum is she's always there for me. And it was really sweet. And I said to him, oh, that's lovely. Excuse me. What do you mean? What do you mean sometimes she keeps promises? And he said, you just don't always keep your promises. And I said, like when? Like what? Give me an example. And he said, well, a couple of weekends ago, you said we go to the movies on the weekend and then we didn't go. And I remember what happened, we got busy, people popped in, and I said to him, that wasn't a promise. He said, I thought it was. Yeah. And then I started to think about all the times that we do this and all the times that we say things. And, I thought, like, how many times do I do this with him? How many times do I do this at work with my colleagues? How many times do we do this all the time? And my head went into a bit of a spin, and I said to him, what happens when I do this? How does this make you feel? And he was sitting on the end of my bed. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, I don't know when I can trust you. Ooh. And it hurt. It really hurt. And I thought, okay, that's what's going on. Right? There's something going on that we are very grossly unaware of, that I think we need to become a lot more aware of. Like, we are all walking around making promises all the time that we don't realise are promises. We may not think of them as promises, but we're making them all the time. And so I started I wanted to understand, what are we doing? When are we doing it? And how are we doing it? What are these things that we may or may not call promises? How are they landing? What are they creating in the minds and the hearts and the psyche of the people that we're connecting with, the people that we want to trust us, the people that we're trying to reach? and what happens, inside those people, and then what happens when we deliver on those, and what happens when we don't deliver on those, and what damage are we causing along the way. And it basically has taken me around the world. I wrote the book, and I've trained now over 30,000 leaders in 19 countries, and it's been fascinating to see how this applies. It's the same. It's a human issue, right? And it's the same all around the world. It's been a fascinating journey.
Well, good on your son for making you be so aware that you wanted to go into this kind of research and training with people. But Vanessa, I think what you're saying here, or what I'm hearing, is a lot of things. Actually, my mind's spinning already. Is really that concept that maybe sometimes we're even unaware of when we're being trustworthy or being untrustworthy, and how important that is for us to be mindful, I suppose, of the things that we are saying or committing ourselves to, whether it's verbally or whether it's in written, because many of us in fact, I'd love to know where you're all from. Are you from a non-profit, government, some other organisation? Because I think we're both talking about internal relationships and external relationships, but really sometimes we're talking about the internal culture that we're creating. But for many of you, yes, who are saying that you're in non-profits, we also make a lot of promises to our donors and our beneficiaries as well. But even government as well make a lot of promises to the community and people. So I think that from whatever organisation you're from, you could possibly think about who are my stakeholders and what kind of promises, and as Vanessa says, it might not be called a promise, but what kind of commitments do we give people, our funders, our donors, our community, our beneficiaries? And then do we actually deliver on that and the impact of that? Vanessa, I'm going to move to a different slide now to just keep us talking about this, because I found a great article, which many of you can look this up, the HBR article that says the Neuroscience of Trust. And it really talks about some of the research that has been done behind this and the importance of really trying to build trustworthy organisations, because the neuroscience is incredible behind this. So you can just read here that compared with people at low trust companies, people at high trust companies report 74% less stress, 106% more energy, 50% more productivity, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their lives, and 40% less burnout. Now that is, wow, that's mind-blowing to me. Can you just explain this, Vanessa? Like, what does this really mean, and what is the impact on these organisations, for seeing this and understanding this?
Yeah. I mean, the whole neuroscience is fascinating. So this article is actually referencing Dr. Paul Zach's work. So I've actually met Paul over in the US. I've actually been over in his lab. We've done quite a bit of, had lots of conversations and things about trust and neuroscience and how trust actually works and how expectations work and the whole prefrontal cortex of the brain, and fascinating work. But the impact of this inside organisations, is fascinating. And look, I think one of the challenges inside organisations is that, and this has been a big battle for a long time, is, the whole concept of the soft skill type stuff, and how do we measure this? It is very clearly able to be measured, the impact of trust. If you look at something like stress, like when you have high trust, that is, when people can actually trust one another, when you've got people who can trust their leaders and their leaders can trust their people, then things just actually work better. You can get on and do things. You can delegate work and know that it's getting done. You can actually people can actually pass on information, and teams actually just work better together. That sense of, we can have a conversation and know that information is being passed on, that needs to be passed on, that information that needs to be held confidential, will be held confidential, inside teams. You often get, when organisations don't have trust, people hold information to themselves and don't pass on things. People think, I might as well just do this job myself because I can't trust that this person's going to do the job. And so you get poor productivity, which increases levels of stress. And so there's a connection, basically what I call a domino effect with these things. So when you get obviously higher levels of stress, impact then the levels of productivity and so on. So, which then, causes sick days. And so they're all interconnected, all these things. So, it's easy to be able to connect all of these things inside organisations together.
Yeah. And I don't think we always call it trust, but I mean, I actually have some lived experience of this fairly recently when I was trying to put a report together, and there was a team of us, and one person in particular was not getting me the information that I needed at the time to pull this report together. And my stress levels were really high because I had a deadline and I was pulling this report together. And so I nearly had a panic. I actually nearly had a panic attack because I just couldn't get the information from my colleague, who we love. We all love our colleagues, right? Sometimes, okay, but we're all not perfect either. And sometimes that trust can be eroded so quickly when it might not even be their fault, because I actually found out later why that person wasn't being able to meet the deadline. But at the time I didn't know what was going on for that colleague. And so for me, my stress levels were really, really high. And, it made me think, am I ever going to want to work with this person again? And so I don't know if other people identify with that. And obviously we're talking generally here. We don't want to name names, but this is the reality. And I think we need to get very real about this. That, we sometimes sort of don't want to work with people, but we don't name it as this thing called trust, because we don't keep asking ourselves the 5 whys, why. And it so often comes back to this thing called trust. Yeah. So I'm happy to hear your questions, anybody, or your thoughts on this. Is it a cultural thing? Do we think that, our organisations, wherever you're from, do we think that this is a cultural issue? I'm really keen to know what you all think, and whether you could identify, even in your own organisation, whether you have high trust culture or a low trust culture. And what is the impact of that? Yeah, okay, great. Jamie says, agree with you. Lack of communication can also break down that trust. Absolutely. When people are not communicating with each other, you start to make up things, don't you? You start to criticize people without really knowing the background to what's going on. But again, that's losing trust, yeah. So I think what we're talking about, Vanessa, is this real importance of having trust within our organisations. And I just wonder, Vanessa, whether you can tell us, because you said you've trained people and you've talked to people about trust. Have you seen organisations that have been able to turn around their levels of trust? Like, what happens when people actually say, okay, we get it now, we really know this is important. How do we start building a higher trust within our teams and organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had organisations that have adopted either the concept of a chief trust officer or ambassadors for trust, and so we've trained them to understand first what actually is trust. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, because we were talking earlier about the trustworthiness, and you and I, Ruth, had this conversation earlier when we were chatting about this distinction between trustworthiness and trust, and the difference between those, and so recognizing that how trust works as opposed to trustworthiness. So those two things are quite distinct and different. They're often confused, and so decoupling those and understanding the difference between those. So how does trust work? Distinct from trustworthiness is really important. So helping them understand that, and then understanding how does trust actually work, and then how do you then map that through the organisation? So what are all the touch points? So helping them build like a stakeholder trust map through the organisation, and understanding what are all the various touch points of trust through the organisation, and then knowing, well, where are the weak points? So I help them, so we train them to develop what we call the trust value chain. So what's the trust value chain through the organisation, and where are the break points? Where are the weak points? So where are the areas where we want to start? Is it customer or donor trust? Is it internal, employee or volunteer trust? Is it trust between teams? Is it trust between the CEO and the board? And it might be a combination of all of those things, but where is it most weak? Where is it damaged? Where is it broken? Where do we want to start? And then helping them know, how do we then start to build those? And then how do we measure the impact of that? So when you get, what we were talking about here before in terms of 74% less stress and things, we want to be tracking and measuring the impact of this as well, so that whatever we're investing in the development of the culture of trust, we're actually also seeing the benefits of that as well, and can report on that to the board, uplines, go, well, yeah, this is what we've done, and this is the impact that it's actually having, and this is the bottom line impact that it's having as well. So we work very closely with the CFO inside the organisation as well, so we can draw it right back to this is having bottom line impact to the organisation too. So absolutely having impact.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fascinated with this concept of the Chief Trust Officer. Has anybody heard of that before? Has anybody worked in a company that has a Chief Trust Officer? I've never heard of that before. And Vanessa, what's the role of a Chief Trust Officer? Like, do they go around saying, how do you trust everybody? Or what's some of their roles? And other than you've just explained this really interesting concept of being able to measure trust and see what the real effect of it is on people, from burnout through to bottom line. But what else does a Chief Trust Officer do?
Yeah, look, it was a concept that I'd developed a long time ago, and it probably came from, I was actually one of the very first compliance people in Australia 26 years ago or something like that, probably showing my age now. And so I saw the development of compliance as a profession, as well. And I thought, I can see the same thing happening with trust. So many organizations have trust as a value. We say trust is important. Every CEO, before I wrote the book, every CEO that I interviewed, I'd ask them, how important is trust in your business? And they would all say it's either critical or it's very important. And then when I would ask them, well, what do you do about it? I just get this silence, they didn't actually do anything. I'm like, how can something be critical or very important in your business and you actually don't do anything? This doesn't make any sense to me, right? So it was a concept that I had. So I thought, well, there needs to be somebody, a point person, that then says, well, if it's that critical and it's that important, therefore it is also a key risk. So part of the challenge is working out, well, who in the organisation should this Chief Trust Officer be? And is it a separate role, or is it somebody who's already in the organisation? Sorry, I just had a call come through then. Am I still with you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, my screen just disappeared and I was like, So yeah, so some organisations it's been the HR person who has a broad remit across the organisation. Others it might be the chief operations officer or risk I think there's still a bit of conversation and about who in the organisation it should be. For some say it should be the CEO who has the ultimate responsibility.
That's me. I agree.
Yeah, and I think it should be the CEO should have the ultimate responsibility and can delegate. But it's basically recognising that trust is something that is critical to our organisation. If we have it, we can succeed across a whole range of measures. If we don't have it, if we lose trust of our people, if we lose trust of our customers, our donors, our shareholders, whatever sort of organisation that we have, then we've lost the game here. So therefore, what are we doing? How are we managing that risk? How are we measuring that? How are we reporting on it? So they're not doing the work, but they're making sure that that work is being done, and they're making sure that it's being allocated properly, that the processes are actually being done. So things like, what are the promises that we're making, and are we actually delivering on those? That's often not something that's being tracked properly inside organisations.
Yeah, so Robert and Emma here are actually highlighting the fact that trust can be lost so quickly as well, and can be lost even again from a cultural perspective. So sometimes it can be kind of like a domino effect, especially if it comes from the top. If we don't trust our leaders, then again, they're setting the tone of this culture. And, once trust is lost, then we have to really work hard on rebuilding this culture that we want, which is being able to trust each other. But I wanted to know really, why do you think, let's talk organisational level, why, Vanessa, do people trust certain brands? And you can see on the slide, I put a few logos here because I know that there's a few sort of trust barometers that people do, and Reader's Digest is one of them that's been looking at brands that are trusted. Band-Aid is actually the most trusted brand in both Australia and US. And I just wondered, tell us a little bit, Vanessa, from your perspective, about brands, and why do we become so trusted as organisations? Now, the Careflight and the Guide Dogs are there because they're often considered one of the most trusted non-profits. But tell us why, again, this is important for us, especially those of us working in non-profits, but also corporates. Why is trust so important as an institutional kind of concept?
Yeah, so brand trust. I love brand trust because that's really where the promise is being made. Band-Aid's a great example. We were chatting about this earlier. It's when a brand becomes a narrative, then it becomes part of our psyche, right? When we talk about, if you've got a pain or a hurt or something, we put a Band-Aid, we put a Band-Aid on it, and the Band-Aid becomes the narrative. It's a product, but there are other products that do the same thing, but we call it all a Band-Aid. And I think someone else mentioned about Hoover as an example as well. That in some countries we don't, we call it a vacuum cleaner, probably more so here in Australia, but in the UK you said you would call that Hoover. I think the US maybe also. So when we associate a brand with something like taking pain away, when there's a deep need, the greater the need, the greater the level of trust. That is something that I've observed across the board and across cultures. The greater the need, the faster the trust is built. We don't question as much when there's a deep need. So identifying the needs, the deep needs that people have, you can build greater levels of trust.
So maybe that's what Careflight and Guide Dogs do really well, is talk about the need for their organisation. And we all know that, for both those organisations, it's absolutely clear why those organisations are needed. And obviously with Band-Aid as well. So maybe it's about us really talking a lot about the impact that we're making and the needs that we're supporting our beneficiaries with. And that's what we've got to really do to build our trust.
And if people are unaware of the alternatives as well, so I think that's where, we're talking about it can be for Band-Aid, for something like Band-Aid, it's very difficult for another brand to get cut through because we just think if I've got a sore, I go to Band-Aid, right? Because that's the brand that I know, and therefore it's the brand that I trust. So sometimes, this is where it gets really interesting when you start to understand the different needs, and I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to actually understand the different needs and motivators. If Band-Aid, and I can't remember, it's been a while since I bought a box of Band-Aids, but if Band-Aid, suddenly was $20 for a box, and I was very, I was running on a very tight budget, and there was another brand there that was $2, for a box. I may actually go, okay, I think I might actually try the cheaper ones here because that's what's actually now driving me. It's no longer so the brand trust starts to wane when another need is actually starting to press in. Right. So understanding what is it that's actually really pressing the pressing need for our donors, and how do we then communicate to that?
Yeah. Richard actually interestingly says, I've worked with guide dogs and care for light, and trust is the very core of what they do and everything they do. So that's a really interesting thing that, again, what you elevate or what you really have that consistent focus on can actually then make you think about it all the time. What are we doing? What are we saying? Are we delivering on our promises? And have we got that communication well with our donors? Do you communicate with your donors well enough, efficiently and effectively enough to maintain that level of trust? And if you don't know that, maybe that's something that you need to actually check out with your donors and your beneficiaries. What level of trust do they have with you? Because again, this is about brand loyalty. So with our donors, we want them to keep coming back. With our customers, we want them to keep coming back, but also our beneficiaries, we want to keep working with them and supporting them. So who is it that we need to really elevate our communications with? And as you said, Vanessa, show that there's good quality. So we're giving them good quality for their investment, whatever that might look like. And then the quality of the service, the quality of the customer service. In fact, somebody else said, it's about customer service. Because that builds trust. And oh my goodness, I have that all the time. When I book my hairdresser or when I go for a coffee, every interaction I have with services and products that I buy, I'm always looking to see what's the customer service like, and that really makes a big impact on whether I go back to that organisation.
Yeah. I did want to just touch on something, if I could quickly, Ruth, and that was that, I have had experiences with some, particularly not-for-profits, where the external brand is really, really strong, but then the internal experience is vastly different, and can often be a revolving door because people expect, they're so familiar with the external brand that they expect that their internal experience when they work for the organisation is going to be the same, and that can often be a very, very big disconnect. And so getting the congruence between the external and the internal brand is also very important.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. Richard's just shared a blog he's written, so that's fantastic. No, happy for everybody to share what you have been reading or what you've been learning about this topic. This is all about sharing, so that's fantastic. Here's one that I've been reading about. This is a McCrindle research that's been done into the key elements that build trust in the charity non-profit sector. And I was incredibly interested to read, what is then really building trust. But Vanessa, I sort of really struggle with this first one, which is transparency, because that's a bit of a loose term to me. Like, I get it. I get the understanding of being transparent, but I really don't understand what that means in action, in practical terms, because there are many things that if we were transparent about might not build the trust with our donors and our community, right? And unfortunately, sometimes I don't think transparency always helps. I'm not against transparency, obviously, but I'm a bit confused, or I'm a bit curious, I suppose, about what does that mean, that if we think the key element of building trust is transparency. What do people think? I'm happy to hear from you, Vanessa, but I want to know what everybody else thinks. How do you and your organisation use transparency to build trust? So pop it in the chat if you have curious questions about that. Vanessa, what do you think? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what people say as well. Look, one of the things that I do often when I'm doing my workshops and things is I do a bit of myth busting at the very start, and I'll ask some questions. One of the very first questions that I ask is, does transparency build trust? And I sort of just leave it open for people to have a bit of a think and a bit of a chat. And because the instant 3-second thing is people think, oh yes, and then you start to think about it. You go, well, does it always build trust? And the answer, of course, is no. Often not. Like our CEO earns 3 times salary as everybody else. Well, that doesn't build trust. Or we use slave labor to create our products. That doesn't build trust.
No.
There's a whole bunch of things that we could be transparent about that doesn't build trust. And so I think we have to be really careful when we're doing surveys, and I'm often banging on about this, constructing surveys and doing research, particularly around something like trust, and even just asking questions about trust, do you trust this? Do you trust that? And people go, yeah, I do. And then but when you've got to scratch the surface, right, and dig a little bit deeper, because they're words that we use often without sort of really understanding the depth and breadth of it. And I think transparency is the same. It's such a big concept. So if you just ask the general person, is transparency important? And people go, yeah, of course it is. Well, yeah, but is it, to what extent, and how do you actually manage transparency on a balance of a whole bunch of other things? And when is it appropriate to be transparent? And what are we transparent about? How do we manage this? It's not always so black and white. And I'm not saying, please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying hide information. What I'm saying is that it's not always so simple. So I have a model of a trustworthy person, and openness and transparency is one of the qualities of that. But I always talk about it needs to be balanced with other qualities as well, and so it's getting the balance of all of these things. There's the timeliness for that. There's how do we do that in a way that's honest, that's caring, that's compassionate, that's thinking about and doing it strategically, that's doing it appropriately, that's managing the risks of that. That's if you're going to be transparent about those things, you've got to think about what impact is that actually going to have, and if you're doing something that's wrong, that you're also correcting that wrong.
Yes.
And talking about what it is that you're actually doing to correct the impact of what you've done wrong, and so on. So
yeah, I think that's a really key one there, because many of you know that I really love evaluation and monitoring and evaluation, that kind of topic. And we're constantly talking about, you shouldn't just pat yourself on the back and only share things that you've done well. In fact, failing forward and monitoring and impact measurement should be about saying, where can we go better? What can we do more efficiently, more effectively? So we don't always want to be talking about what we're doing well. And in fact, Jamie says there, I appreciate when brands don't hide mistakes, and that goes for the sake of the same for our team as well. We don't always want people to be trying to be so professional and squeaky clean and doing everything right. We actually appreciate it when people are failing forward. But I think you just hit on it there, Vanessa. It's it's saying, well, what are we going to do as a result of this, you know, where we could do better. That's the kind of transparency certainly I love and appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah, there was an example quite a few years ago now. I think it was Mars Confectionery. I know it's a corporate example, but and they had a product tampering example, and they involved everybody. They involved, you know, consumers in the whole process. They were very open about what was actually going on, and in the end, their share price tripled. And you know, in the overall organisation, you know, and their product sales increased incredibly because of their transparency. But yeah, that's why I said transparency in and of itself, I think we need to be careful, but it's how we actually do that and do that strategically.
Yeah. What else on this list are people looking at or doing in their organisation? Is there any others here that you feel are really important to your organisation, or any that you feel you could do better on? I'm curious to know. Those of you who are looking at the slide, we delivering strong outcomes. That's a really important one, but we actually have to measure them first. Then we have to actually communicate that. I'm interested to know what else you're doing. That communication one, that's a big one you could explore with your team, is, you know, how do we use communication to build trust? Because communication is not just verbal, it's not just written. There's many platforms now that we can actually use to build trust. Emails, I think, actually don't always build trust, because again, you can't sort of really communicate your feelings or emotions very well. I always try, if I feel like emotional about an email, I always try and back off and not send straight away, because I know it's just not going to come across as well as if I'm calm and relaxed and having a considered approach to an email. I don't know if anybody is the same with that. But again, what are the different ways, Vanessa, that we use communication to build trust? Can you give us any really great examples, or give us some tips, I suppose, if we're trying to improve our own relationships with people, especially if we're leaders? What can we do, Vanessa, in terms of communication strategies to build trust?
Yeah, look, communication actually often comes up on surveys and things. You know, poor communication often comes up as, you know, one of the issues inside organisations. You know, that there's poor communication, or not enough communication is often how it's worded. And I often say, is it that there's not enough communication, or is it how communication is actually happening? So someone years ago sort of talked to me about that often leaders communicate. I think was the term that they used. Like, so they're talking to their people, and I thought, well, if it's just a one way, then that's communicating as opposed to communicating. And I liked that. I liked that terminology. So I often ask leaders, are you communicating or are you communicating with your people? So it's
feedback loops, feedback loops, and having good feedback loops,
absolutely. So finding out how do people like to be communicated with, as well, and how often, and what style, and it's not always a one size, you know, fits all, and that can also be time consuming as well. So, you know, different styles suit different people. Some people are happy with the, you know, once a week or the once a month, you know, email or video thing, depending on the size of your organisation. You know, others like the lunch and learn, you know, or the, you know, they're actually sitting down and having the chat. And some people like the daily thing, and we're all different, right? We're not robots. We're all different, and so we like different communication styles and things, and that can be tiresome. And some leaders can't be bothered, and they're just like, it's just, you know, I've communicated because I've sent the email to my people. What are they complaining about? Well, some of them are complaining because that's not enough for them, you know, and so it's just recognizing that we're people, right? We're human, and we have different needs, and for different reasons. So
yeah. Richard's sharing some great case studies in the chat. That's fantastic, Richard. So maybe one of the things that we can all go back and do is at our next team meeting is actually talk about, you know, different communication styles and what we want in our team. And maybe if you're a leader, you could actually talk about, you know, the concept of trust with people and say, how do I build trust? You know, what do I do that's either trustworthy or not so trustworthy? What do I do that actually could damage trust within that team? Be very vulnerable and be very transparent about the fact that we actually want to build trust, and we recognize the power and benefits of trust within our teams, starting within our teams, because that's culture. And then of course that will then be something that we do out externally as well to our donors and our other stakeholders. Oh my goodness, Vanessa, this chat is just going so fast. There's so much rich sort of information with what you're sharing, but I am conscious of time, and if anybody has a question before we run out of time, please put it in the chat or just come off mute. But while people are just, you know, thinking about any final questions, Vanessa, what are your takeaway tips for us? You know, what are you going to challenge us, I suppose, to walk away from this conversation doing or thinking or exploring? Where do we need to go next if we're very interested in this topic?
Yeah, there's probably three things. I always like to finish with three things. We all like threes, right? That I think are really important to have a think about. And then there was just something I'd like to just offer if people want to find out a little bit more as well. So the first one is what we touched on before about the external versus the internal branding. I think that's really important because there's often a focus on, you know, one over the other, and I think getting that congruence and balance between the two is really important. You know, we know within the not-for-profit sector in particular, you know, there has been, you know, a bit of a revolving door in terms of, you know, staff and retention. You know, retention levels have been incredibly challenging, you know, keeping good people. So, and there's, you know, there has been a big disconnect between that, you know, that external brand and the internal brand. So, so I think tracking that congruence is really important. So I would say a focus on that is really important from a trust perspective. Because your brand ambassadors are your people, you know, you know, that's been banded.
Yeah, I often like to say that culture and brand are the two sides of the same coin. So they're, you know, they are so interconnected because if yeah, they're just so, they have to be congruent with each other. Yeah. So I agree with that, Vanessa.
Yeah, I get uncomfortable when people only want to talk about brand trust and not talk about employee, you know, or volunteer trust. It's like you can't do one without the other. They are two sides of the one coin. So I always try and encourage people to do both. The second thing is what we also talked about the chief trust officer. I would very much encourage people to really think about having somebody, whether, you know, an ambassador for trust, a trust champion, a chief trust officer inside the organisation, someone who really takes the mantle of trust inside your organisations. It is becoming a thing, and it will become a thing. And yeah, I would love to see the particular not-for-profit sector really leading the charge, you know, on that. So, so going to throw down that challenge for you, and that is something that I'm very happy for anybody to contact me to talk about what that might look like or how you might go about that. So I'll pop my contact details in the chat if you want to just have a, you know, you can just have a free sort of 30-minute chat with me about what that might look like, and we can organise a conversation. The third thing is something we probably haven't really touched on today, and that is trust is a whole of life thing. You know, we've talked a lot about the organisation, but certainly in my experience, if people have trust issues, like deep trust issues from their personal lives, you know, even from their childhood, you cannot divorce yourself from those at work, and that has been my experience. I've seen it time and time again. So I think there is a press for organisations, particularly now as we're talking more and more about well-being, in the workplace. We've got massive mental health issues and things. I think we have a responsibility as leaders in organisations to look at the whole person. And so when we're talking about something like trust, we have to look at what's happening with the trust for the person, for the individual person. How do we trust ourselves?
Yeah.
How do we turn up every day? How do I trust myself as a parent? As a mother, a father, as a sibling? In my personal relationships, and how do I, in my career, in my identity, and as I turn up with my colleagues and things as well. And so for me, trust flows from the inside out. And so I think there is, and the work that I do and the model that I teach and everything, you get as much from it personally as you do from it professionally, and organisationally. And that's been the constant feedback as well. So
I totally get that. When we move around organisations, we kind of bring stuff with us from different organisations. So if you have moved from an organisation that there wasn't trusting relationships, I can really imagine that you'd bring that distrust, I suppose, with you sometimes. And that could really have a damaging effect on you and the team, even just walking into a new organisation. That's quite mind-blowing to me to think about, even in induction, when we're doing induction with new people and talk about trust and how we build trust right from induction, possibly. Those are 3 amazing tips for us, I think, and I'm already thinking I need to go and talk to my family tonight, and we need to have around the dinner table a bit of a discussion around trust and how we're going with that as a family. And then my team, when I'm back in the office and our next team meeting, I might be sort of throwing that up as a discussion starter. Looks so good, Vanessa. I also, absolutely, please, anyone who wants to further this conversation, connect with Vanessa. But also, if you're interested in being part of a trust alliance, which QT is developing, called it's the Centre for Future Enterprise. We're doing a lot of research in this area, but also supporting organisations and doing some really, really interesting projects around this. Feel free to, you can just join in, and there's various events and various networking that's happening. So if you'd like to be part of that, please just email me, and I'm very happy to connect you with the team at the Trust Alliance at QT. And again, please stay in touch. We're now at the end of today's session. Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks everybody for coming. I hope you've taken some gold away from there, and you're thinking more about, okay, what is the power of trust in our organisation and what do we need to do about it? Thank you so much for coming today and being part of the conversation. We'll be having more Tea and Buns, so please stay connected with us. Please send me any emails of questions that you didn't get answered, or any other topics that you'd like to consider and explore as part of our community of practice here. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. And we will see you all soon at another Tea and Buns, or maybe one of the workshops or things that we're holding in the future. So see you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.